Okay, good morning everyone. Feil Chanukah. So we are on Yud. We'll just chazer from Tesam at Beis. We said yesterday that Rav Ashi told us Tashma on Tesam at Beis. Tzlucha shehinicha megula v'almatza mechusa tmeya shani omer adam tamei nichlas l'sham v'kisa. Hinicha mechusa u'ba matza megula im yochol l'chol delishnos meno nachash di Rabbi Gamliel sheyirid batal balayla psula. So remember we were talking about yesterday. We were talking about sakana versus isura. And Safek Sakana, do you go to Chumrah? Safek Isura, do you go to Chumrah? How does it work? So the Gemara says that Rav Ashi tries to bring a proof. And he says, you see clearly that if you have a flask of mayim, right? And you want to use it for, not to drink, you want to use it for mechatas, to put in ashes and sprinkle it. So if it was uncovered and then you find it covered, you have to be worried that maybe an Adam Tameh covered it. In the process, he made the entire thing Tameh, and you can't use it. But if it was covered and now it's uncovered, so you can assume that it wasn't an Adam Tameh, and you can go ahead and you can use it. Says the Gemara, Amar B'Shua ben Levi Matam, top of Yud Amud Aleph, Mimnei shedarkon shel shratzim liglos vein darkon lechasos. Because it's the way of shratzim and of animals and of snakes to uncover but not to cover. Skip the parentheses. V'ilu safek mayim megulin asurin. And yet you see that when you have a suffix by sakana, this is not mayim megulin. This is mayim chayim. This is, right, this is using it as mechatas. But when you have a suffix, whether you could drink or not, what did we say the halacha is you can't drink? Shmamina chamira sakanta meisura shmamina. We were talking about, again, whether sakana was more machmir than isur, whether sakana was the same as isur. Do you go by rove by one, not by the other? So he brings the following proof. Rav Ashi and the Gemara says, shmamina, we learn from here that in general we're more machmir by sakana than we are by yisurim. What's the proof? So he says again, if it was uncovered and then it was covered, so you have to be choshesh that an adam tameh touched it. If it was covered and now you find it uncovered, you don't have to be choshesh. Why? What's the reason? So the way that Rashi explains the Gemara, shedarkon shel tzrachim liglos vein darkon lichasos, what's pshat? When it was uncovered and now you find it covered, what are the options? Who covered it? Well, animals don't cover things. So it was either an Adam Tahor or an Adam Tameh. Since it's a 50-50 Safek, who it was, it could have very easily been a not 50-50, but there's a good chance it was an Adam Tameh and a good chance it was an Adam Tahor. What do you need to do? You need to be Choshesh that it was an Adam Tameh, and therefore you have to assume that it's Tameh. When you're going from being covered to uncovered, so now you throw the animal into the equation. So now what are the possibilities? Either an Adam Tahor uncovered it, which would be fine, or a sheretz uncovered it, which would be fine. Again, sheretz uncovering it for the purposes of drinking would be a problem, but uncovering it for the purposes of just uncovering, even if it drank from it, let's just see for now, right? Seemingly it would be okay. The Gemara says, okay, maybe it wouldn't be okay, but Natza, Rabbi Gamliel says what? Right? If you find it to be open, then you have to be choshesh. It's possible, the opposite, right? That in general you say tameya, but if you leave it uncovered and now you find it, if you leave it covered and you find it uncovered, so then the question was whether an animal could go. But if an animal couldn't go, but either way, what do you see? You see that you have to take the possibilities here. That when it's uncovering it, the animal can be included in the equation. So now you have the fact that maybe an Adam Tahor uncovered it, it would be fine. Maybe an animal uncovered it, and assuming he didn't drink from it, it would be fine. Or an Adam Tameh uncovered it. That means there's two possibilities that an Adam Tameh didn't touch it. Therefore, one can be a little bit more mekil. The point is that there's room to be mekil when you're dealing with non-sakana issues. Yet by mayim megulin, even though most of the animals in the world are not animals that are poisonous, you have to be choshesh for the poisonous animals. That's what the Gemara is basically saying. And therefore, shma mina, that we're more machmir by sakana than we are by isser. It's not hasam. Gimel mashkan asur mishum giloy mayim v'yayin v'chalav. So in general, there are three types of liquids that you have to be worried for leaving them uncovered. Water and wine and milk. Kama yishuv yasurim. So when we say that you have to be worried, we always talk about overnight. But it's not really overnight. If you go from one room to the next, today, okay, we say overnight, you leave it in the kitchen, nobody's there for it, it's very quiet. But in general, if you would go out for 5 minutes, so then a snake could have come and drink from it during 5 minutes. So how long are you allowed to leave it uncovered? The amount of time it would take a snake to come from its hiding place, drink. Well, that's that's not a very long time. V'kama makam karv, how far is this close place? Amar Yitzchak Brei Rabbi Yehuda kadesh yitzim mitachas ozen kli v'yishta. Seems to be a very small amount of time. It could come from underneath the lip or from underneath the handle of the cup and come drink. I don't know, how long is that? 10 seconds? 15 seconds? Says Gemara, yishta, drinking, what do you mean? It should be longer than that. Hakachazilei. Shouldn't just be the amount of time it takes to come and drink. It should be the amount of time it comes to drink and what? And then go back into its hole. Because if you catch it on the way back to the hole, you ain't drinking the thing anyway. So bottom line is, it's not just overnight. It's that if you leave a thing long enough that a snake could have come from underneath, gone into it to drink, and then go back into its hole, again, seemingly that would be 10 seconds. I mean, how long would that be? 20 seconds? I don't know how long snakes drink for. I never checked. But the point is that it wouldn't be a very, very long time. Says the Gemara, Itmar hashochet b'sakin v'nimseis piguma. If you shecht with a sakin, and then you find the sakin to be beguma. Now it's very clear, as Rashi says, you even see it in Rashi, you see that he changes the gear, so v'achar kach nimseis piguma. What does that mean? It means that, as we'll see, if you shecht something, so you have to check the knife before you shecht it. If you check it right after you shecht, as we'll see, seemingly, let's just say for now, if you check right after you shecht and there was a problem with the knife, you can assume that the shechita was bad. Let's say I shecht, and I don't check the knife for 12 hours. And after 12 hours, I check the knife. And I use the knife in between. No. So, do I need to be worried that at the time that I shechted it was already bad? Again, what's the problem with the knife having a pagam in it? We said that if it's not 100%, if there's a little nick in it, then when you cut, you're not necessarily slicing directly through the keshet and the veshet and the kaneh. You're going to go ahead and you're going to tear it. And that's a problem. So now when I check 12 hours later, again, I'm giving an extreme case. You check 12 hours later, so if I use the knife, let's say in the meantime, to build my house, so do I assume that the pagam came, that it was already there at the time of the shechita? Do I have to be choshesh? Obviously, I don't know for sure. Or can I assume that it got the pagam after I did the shechita? So says the Gemara, Mendel says can't assume. Obviously, somebody's going to argue. Says the Gemara, Amar Afuna, we have a machlokes. Afilu shiber ba'atzamas kol hayom psula chashinan shema ba'or nifkama. The or, when we say or, we're talking about this part. The or before you get, right? There's two parts, as we'll see. There's really a lot of parts. You cut the animal. The first thing you touch is the skin. And the animal is not like our skin. It's a thick skin. So everything you touch is a thick skin. It goes at the same time, but you'd go the hide, through the keshet and through the veshet and the kaneh. And then when you're done, basically, as we'll see, according to many, you're going all the way to the back. And there's a neck bone. We're not going to get to that yet, but we'll get to that in a minute. So it could have either got a nick beforehand. It didn't get a nick on the veshet and the kaneh, obviously. It didn't get a nick on the trach and the esophagus. It could have gotten a nick beforehand. It could have gotten a nick afterwards. Maybe we're not bringing that in yet, but we'll see soon, maybe in the back of the neck. But let's assume it couldn't have gotten a nick on the back of the neck, but it could have gotten a nick throughout the day when you're fixing your kitchen. So it says the Gemara, even if you go ahead and you use that knife during the next 11 and a half hours to break atzamos, to break bones, you use it for whatever you're using it for. Now you come at the end of the day and you look at the knife, you're like, wow, that's got a bunch of nicks. So we say, well, obviously it's got nicks, you were breaking bones with it. Says the Gemara, according to Rafuna, psula chashinan shema ba'or nifkama. You're right. It could have gotten from breaking the bones the entire day, but it could have also been there from before the time. It could have gone there at the time that you shechted, and you didn't check. Again, you checked right before the shechita, but it could have gotten pagam, it could have gotten a nick right when you did the shechita, before you got to the kesh and the right, from the or, from the hide. And therefore, since you didn't check it right after the shechita to make sure that it didn't have a nick, you can't go ahead and eat the food.
So we nix it.
Oh.
For Rav Chisda Amar, Kshera, yes, we nix it.
Cut it out.
Like we say, that when you sit next to people, they start to have osmosis towards you, so.
I don't know who's osmosis.
You might want to move to the other side of the room over there.
We're quiet back here.
You might want to start sitting. You might want to start sitting outside.
It's okay, it's only Fridays right now.
For Rav Chisda Amar Kshera.
Which corner they sleep in?
Right. Wow, I didn't say that.
That's terrible.
This guy just falls asleep, but I can't tell. You know, him I have to like check carefully. That's why he sits right in front of me. He wants to be blocked by the camera. That's why he puts his arm like this. It looks like he's concentrating in deep meditation for half an hour. For Rav Chisda Amar Kshera. For Rav Chisda. Okay, it looks like Mr. Rosenblum and Gershon are the only ones that are paying attention. Says the Gemara. For Rav Chisda Amar Kshera Shema be'etzem nifkama. So Rav Chisda says it's kasher, because you can assume that be'etzem nifkama, you can assume, not assume, but you can say maybe when you were going out and shopping. As we'll see in the Gemara is going to make a discussion, but right now it seems like maybe one can argue that Rav Chisda would only allow you to be tola it to say that it came from the etzem, if you went ahead in the next 11 and a half hours, you were using it for etzem. If you're not using it for anything afterwards, seemingly Rav Chisda would agree, we'll see maybe not, but seemingly Rav Chisda at this point would agree that if you don't use it for anything else, you take it, you put it away, and then you find a nick, you have to assume that it came from the shechita, from beforehand. But here, he says that if you use it for other things in between the time that you use it and you check it, you can assume that it came from the actual stones, from the bones.
Designated knives, he has
You
3
think?
designated knives.
Okay.
So all of a sudden now this
Yeah.
knife is being used for something else?
Sounds like it, yeah. Bishlam Rafuna Kishmaite. So Rafuna makes sense, like he says elsewhere, that he says Bechiskas Isser Omedes. This was Isser because it wasn't yet shachted. So unless you could prove to me that the knife definitely was fine at the time of the shechita, it's going to be a problem. Ela Rav Chisda my time. But what's the reason for Rav Chisda? There's a small possibility, or there's even a big possibility that it got from the what? That it got from the atzamas, from the bones. But how do you know that? How can you assume that? Amar Lacha, very interesting. Listen to this. Etzem vadai pogame, or suffik pogame, suffik lo pogame. Have a suffik uvadei vein suffik motzi midei vadai. Very interesting. So Rafuna again says, you shecht and you don't check the knife and you check it 12 hours later, even after his chiddush, even after using it for breaking up bones. You can't assume. It still has the chazaka that it wasn't shechted right. Until you can take it out of that chazaka, you have to assume that it wasn't shechted right. And even though you use it for bones, you have to assume that maybe the nick came before you did the shechita. Comes along Rav Chisda and says, no. What do you mean? He says, we have 2 possibilities here. Either it came from the ore, right? You checked it right before the shechita. Either it came from the hide when you did the shechita, but the possibility that it came from the hide is maybe yes, maybe no. Sometimes you can get a nick from the hide, and many times you don't, or else we'd be ruined. If most of the times that you did shechita, you get a nick from the hide, you'd never be able to do shechita.
Yeah.
So if anything, you could say most times, but let's even say it's 50-50. So there's a suffix yes, suffix no, that it comes from the hide. When you take a knife and you bang it against atzamos, it definitely gets a nick. So what are the 2 possibilities here? There's a definite possibility versus a maybe possibility. So which one do we assume like? We assume that it was like the definite possibility and that it came from the atzamos and not from the hides, and therefore it's kosher and yashar. Says the Gemara, good try. Masiv Rava l'siyua l'Rafuna. So he wants to bring a proof for Rafuna who says it's going to be a problem. Why? You see another case, similar case, or maybe not so similar. Taval ve'ala v'nimsa alav davar chotzetz. Again, similar case, but different case. You go into the mikvah and you come out and you go to work. And you happen to work with dirt or clay or pen or paint. And when you come home that night, or you're ready to eat the truma tara or whatever you're supposed to eat, betara, you realize that you have paint all over yourself. So the question becomes, chotzetz. So you see it's a davar chotzetz. Ava bishin itzasik bo'osamin kol hayom kulo, lo also lo tfilat sheyom ali bari li shayalai kodem lachein. Shlo yalai kodem lachein. So what do you see? You worked with paint all day long. You think for sure the paint, when you check it at night, came from the work. No. You cannot say that it came from the work. You have to assume that it was on your body when you went into the mikvah. Because Lamaisa, what? Lamaisa, what was your chazaka, seemingly? You had a cheskas tumah before you went into the mikvah. Unless you can prove to me that you were definitely clean when you came out of the mikvah, that means you checked yourself when you came out of the mikvah, it's going to be a problem. Says the Masiv Rava l'siyua l'Rafuna, he says this is support for Rafuna. It's a support because against Rav Chisda. Rav Chisda says what? You could be toled on what? You can assume that it came when you were chopping all the atzamas during the day. You can assume the nick came from there. Therefore, why can't you assume that the paint came from there? Same thing. You have to be homed al cheskasa. V'hacha devadai taval savik avela savik lavela v'kaasi savik emotzi midei vadai. Over here, you have a given and a suffix. We're going to see it's not exactly the same. But just like over there, we had the given. The given is that if you bang it against an atzamos, it's going to get a thing. It's going to get a nick. The possibility is that when you cut it over here, it's suffix might get suffix might. What do we say according to Rav Chisda? You go like the vada. You assume that it came from the atzamos, and it's going to be okay the shechita. So over here you have the same thing. What was the vadai? The vadai we know. We have cameras. We have witnesses. You went into the mikvah. That's the vadai. What's the suffix? Maybe you had paint on you. Maybe you didn't. Well, we have a vadai. You went into the mikvah. And a suffix, maybe you had paint on you, maybe you didn't. We should go according to Rav Chisda like the Vadai. It's not exactly the same. Wait a second. We should go like the Vadai and assume that you went into the mikvah. But we don't. It must be like Rafuna, that if there's a possibility even, versus a Vadai, in the case of in the case over here, there was a possibility that it came from the ore. Even though Vadai, it would have come from the Atzamos, if you would have done it Atzamos, but there's also a possibility it came from the ore. A suffix is enough to say, even though it might have definitely, even though had you not gotten it from here, it definitely would have come from here. You still have to be choshesh, you have to worry about the suffix. So to over here, you have to worry about the suffix, the paint that's on you. Says the Gemara, 1 second. But understand, 1 second. Over there, what's the case? We say the guy was tamei. The guy was tamei, so before he went in, so you have to prove now that what? You have to prove that he became tahor. Until you can prove that he didn't have anything on his body, so lamaisa, he's going to be tamei. Says Gemara, hachanami hamei beimachas kas veimer lo nishchata. But now instead, you could say the same thing here. Over here, what? Over here, you have the same thing. You have the behema, who wasn't yet, what? Behema had a chazaka that it wasn't shachted, and yet Rav Chisda says it's okay. Harei shchuta lefanecha, says Gemara. Well, over here, the guy, the behema shachted. Hachanami harei teva lefanecha, you went in the mikvah. Ha'is yal delei bereyusa. Yeah, but there was a reyusa. There was a problem. Hachanami yisal de bereyusa. Back and forth. Whatever you want to say about this case, you say about that case. There was a chazak on the guy that he was tamei. Well, there was also a chazak on the behema that he was tamei, and yet Rav Chisda says it's okay. Lamaisa, there was something that came up later. Yeah, well, there was something that came up later over there also, and he said it was okay. Rather, what's the difference? How can you explain this even according to Rav Chisda? Sakein israi behema lo israi. What's the difference? You can't bring me a proof against Rav Chisda. Again, Rav Chisda said in the case of the knife, you don't have to assume that what? You don't have to assume that it came from the ore. You don't have to be worried about the ore. You can assume that it came from there, and therefore the shechita is fine. So why over here can't you assume that when the guy went to work, the paint came from being at work? Says Gemara, there's a difference here. Here there's a third party involved, or the knife. Tosfos says a little bit different. He says fake, but let's assume not like Tosfos. Again, it just makes it a little bit clearer. What do you have here? We're talking about safek and vadai. Here it's all happening with the guy. The guy's tamei. The guy goes into the mikvah. The guy has paint on him. The question becomes, what do? Do we assume that the paint came before or after? We don't know. We have to be choshesh. We have to worry. We have to be machmir and say, maybe the paint was there before. Here, the behema was a problem. It wasn't shachted. It was alive. It was shachted. The behema is perfectly fine. It was shachted. The only question we have now is on a third party, on another object, or a second party, on the knife. Now when we start having problems with knives, which is not the etzem, which is not the actual item, not like the guy where now we're not sure he himself, yes, he had a chazak, he was tamei, yes, he went in, but maybe that one, maybe going in, didn't get rid of the chazaka that he was tamei because he has paint, etc., etc. Here we had an animal that wasn't good. Now the chazaka becomes that it is good because it was shachted. Later we have a question about the knife. Well, this still has a chazaka that it was shachted. Now we have a separate question about a knife. Was the knife good? Was the knife not good? It's sort of like a separate question. Therefore, we could be makil in that case, but we're not going to be makil. So even if you're going to say that by the paint case, you have to be worried that he got the paint before he went to work, you don't have to be worried, says Rav Chisda, in the case of the sakin, because the sakin is already, now you can get into this whole discussion. Well, safek versus vadai, he would have definitely gotten a nick from here, from the atzamos, maybe he got a nick when he did the or. Since the sakin is a separate entity, we could be makil in the case of the sakin.
Why would the Gemara look at the chazaka being on the animal? If the chazaka is on the knife,
Yes.
and the chazaka is a hestes kashrus in the knife, that in the cases are incomparable. One is a man, the chazaka on that, and the other one's
That's
not
the Gemara's
on the animal,
argument.
but it's on the knife.
The Gemara is arguing. The Gemara is arguing that we could be more makil. The Gemara is arguing that,
How I mean that the chazaka is on the animal, it's not on the animal.
but it is on the animal. The Gemara is, but at the end of the day, the Gemara is saying that the animal.
has hestes kashrus.
Hamed behema al cheskos of emer lo nishchita. Right now, the end of the day, we have an animal that's been shachted. We checked the knife right before it was shachted. We have an animal that's been shachted. The chazaka is that this animal was shachted fine. Later on, now we have a question about the chazaka of the knife. Again, it's complicated. I'm not trying to oversimplify it. We have a question about the chazaka of the knife. There, okay, we have a question, but we're going to go with the vadai versus the safek. We're going to assume that it broke the bones and that it got ruined from the bones. And therefore, we're not going to ruin, we're not going to go back. This guy, where he himself, we never had a chazaka to get him out of the tumah. That's the point, is we got this. We actually checked the knife, and therefore we got this animal out of not being shechted. Yeah. Now, later, a thing arises, yeah, it's possible that he didn't get out of shechted, but as far as we saw, he's out of the problem of not having shechita. As far as we saw, this guy maybe never got out of it. He himself maybe never got out of the chazaka of being tamei because he had paint on him maybe the whole time. That's the point. Says the Gemara. Meisvei, another question. Shacharet aveshes, veshet, ve'achakach nishmata gargaras kshera. Nishmata gargaras ve'achakach shacharet aveshet psula. What's the case? We're dealing with a bird. The halacha is by a bird, and again, never lose the trees from the forest. Like, just make sure you get the details. By a bird, you don't have to shech both things. By a bird, we said that by an animal, unless you shech both things, so let's say you shech the trachea. Let's say you shecht one, and then the other one has a pagam. It's not kosher. By the bird, as long as you shecht one, and even if the other one then gets ruined, it's not a problem. Because if you remember, we said the other day that what? If you get a mum after the shechita, it's not a problem. We said the other day we weren't sure, did the mum come before the shechita, after the shechita, but if you get a mum, if it becomes a treifa after the shechita, it's okay. That's what we said. We just weren't sure whether it became a treifa before or after the shechita. So by an animal, you don't really have that. Because if you mess up the second one, even after the first one, if you shech the first part, the trachea, and then the second part gets a mum, it's garbage. But by the bird, it depends which one came first. If you're able to shech the first part, and then the second part, you didn't shech 100% fine, it's still kosher. Because you already did the first part. So now what happened? So again, you shechted the veshet and then the gargeres, the trachea separated from the jaw, kshera, because you already did what? You already shechted the veshet. But if the jaw falls off first, then you have what? Then it's a treifa. Now even if you shech the other part fine, it's a problem. But what happens if you shech at a veshet and nimtza geresh shmuta? Now you shecht one, but afterwards, again, if then you see the second part separates, then it's fine, not a problem. But let's say you shech the first part, the veshed, and then you realize that the gargeres at the jaw had separated, the trachea had separated from the jaw, but you're not sure if it happened before or after you did the shechita. If it happened afterward, you're fine. If it happened before, it's a problem. If you know for sure, then you know the answer. If it happened before, it's a problem. If it happened after, it's okay. But here you don't know. So what do? It's a problem. And not only is that case a problem, any suffix in shchita is going to be a problem. Who's that like? That's like Rav Huna. Rav Huna says, any suffix in shchita, he says that if you go ahead and what? And you shach the animal and you find the knife to be pugum afterwards, so what do? Even if you find it 12 hours later, it's a suffix in shchita, therefore you have to assume the worst. Rav Chizda says, no, suffix in shchitas are not a problem. Sometimes they are. Maybe he would agree that here it is, but not every single suffix is going to be a shechita, is going to be a problem. Says Gemara, my kol suffix b'shechita lasuyamai. This last line, that not only in this case is it going to be a problem, but any suffix is going to be a problem. Lav lasuya ki agavnes, and not to include our case of the knife, that if you have a suffix with the knife, it's going to be okay, it's going to be bad. Psula, not like Rav Chizda, says Gemara, lo, lasuye suffix shah, suffix daras. You're right. Rav Chizda will agree. There are certain cases of suffix shchita that's going to be a problem. If you're not sure whether you paused or not, let's not concentrate on that for a second. If you're not sure whether the veshet was shechted first or last, fine, that's a din in the animal, we're not going to have a problem. But again, going back to what we said before, if it's a din in the knife, so maybe if there's a suffix in the knife afterwards, it'll be okay. Maishna, what's the difference? So the same thing. Hasa misyal de bereyusa bebehema. Hacha sakin israi behema lo israi. Same thing again. Rav Chizda will tell you that even that case, just like the case of the guy in the mikvah, is a different case because it's all about his body. So too over here, it's all about the behema. We have a suffix whether what? Whether the behema's body, whether the jaw separated from the trachea before or after he shechted the veshet. So Rav Chizda will agree in that case, a suffix you have to be l'chumra. But in the case where there's a third party, where we're not dealing with the animal itself, we're dealing with the sakin, then all of a sudden I can say, in that case, I'm going to be mekel. I'm going to say that it's going to be kshera, even if you find the sakin to be a problem 12 hours later. That's the nafkamina. That's the main nafkamina. How do we hold? Hilchas hakavasi Rav Huna kishelo shiber ba'etzem, v'hilchas hakavasi Rav Chizda kishiber ba'etzem. Beautiful. We hold like Rav Huna that what? When there are no bones that are broken afterwards. That means if you don't go ahead and use the knife afterwards, you just take the knife, you shecht, you leave it for 12 hours, and then you check it. Obviously, we're going to hold like Rav Huna that you have to assume what? That there's a suffix, whether it got it from the or not. If there's just a suffix, again, it seems like Rav Chizda's whole svara was that what? You used it to break bones afterwards, therefore we could be told that we could assume that it came from the bones. But Rav Chizda seemingly, again, hilchasa kavase de Rav Huna, that if you take the knife, you shecht, and right after the shechita, you put the knife down, and then you shecht, and then you check 12 hours later, but you didn't use it for anything in between. We're going to have to be choshesh. We're going to have to worry that it was a problem when you shechted. But if you actually take the knife and you break up bones right afterwards, then in a chanami, we're going to hold like Rav Chizda, that you have the vadai breaking up the bones, you have the suffix, maybe yes, maybe no from the or. We're going to pass like Rav Chizda. That's what the Gemara says. And then the Gemara says something interesting. If I told you, Hilchas HaKavasei de Rav Huna, what would you have told me? What would you have told me? If I told you that the case was that you had a knife, you shechted, you took the knife, you put it down for 12 hours, and you checked it. What would you have thought? You would have thought, I think, what I told you originally when we started learning the Gemara 10 minutes ago, or 15 minutes ago. What would you have said? Rav Chizda would agree in that case, of course. Rav Chizda only came and said that you could assume that the knife was fine if you then used it to break up atzamos. Then at 12 hours later, you look at the knife and it has pegam in it, so then you can assume that what? It came from the atzamos, because you have the vadai versus the savik. I would have thought that what? Rav Chizda would agree that in a case, like the Gemara is saying, Hilchas HaKaravuna, he would have agreed that if you take the knife and you cut the animal and you put it down, and you check it 12 hours later, and you haven't used it, and you look at it and it has a nick, then you have to assume that maybe what? That ain't a chanami. Maybe it did come from the or, maybe it came from the hide, and it would be bad, just like Rav Huna. That's what I would have thought. The problem is, if that's true, what does it mean, hilchasa kavase de Rav Huna? The halacha is like Rav Huna, where you cut it and you put it down. What do you mean? The halacha is not like Rav Huna. The halacha is like everybody. Yeah. Clearly, the fact that it says halacha is like Rav Huna implies that Rav Chisda would hold, fascinating, Rav Chisda would hold that if you take a knife and you check it, and you shecht an animal, and you put it down and you don't check it, and you don't use it in the afternoon. If you use it in the afternoon to break up bones, Rav Chisda says for sure you could assume it came from the bones, and we say halacha is like that. If you use it to break up bones and you put it down and you check tonight, you can assume that it came from the bones and that the shechita was fine. But Rav Chisda is telling us that even if you don't use it to break up bones, even if you take an animal and you shecht it, and you take the knife and you put it down on the side, and you come back 12 hours later and it hasn't been used between, you can still eat the animal. That's a chiddush. Why? Why can you eat the animal? The whole reason he said that you can use it and eat the animal is because you seem to have used it for what? To break up the bones. And that's where the nick came from. But now it sounds like hilchasa kavase de Rav Huna. The halacha is not like Rav Chisda in that case, because it makes no sense. But what was his opinion? We're assuming that if you shecht the animal and you put it down and you leave it for 12 hours, halach is you cannot eat the animal. When you check it 12 hours in and it has a nick, because there's a real chance, you don't know for sure, but there's a real chance that it got the nick in the hide, and then by the end of the day, when you went ahead and you did the shechita, it was already a pasul knife. That's the halacha. And halacha is also that if you use it to break up bones in between, it's going to be okay, because then you can assume that it came from the bones. That's the halacha. But the question now becomes, what was Rav Chisda? What's Rav Chisda's habit? Even though we don't paskin like him, why would he possibly hold? What's the svara that he would possibly hold that if you use a knife to cut up an animal, and you put the knife right down, and you come back 12 hours later and you haven't used it for anything else in between, Lamaisa, now the animal's kosher. What do you mean? How could you not be worried that it came from the or? Where else would it have come from?
Is it that bone? You said you go all the way around on the back.
Says the Gemara. This is where it comes in. Says the Gemara, Michlal de Rav Chisda avagav de lo shiber ba'etzem ella b'may ifkim. According to Chisda, even though we don't paskin like him, if it's true that you put it and you shechted the animal, and he's not worried in general for the ripping of the or, because if he was, then he would have to say, even in the case that you put it into the atzamos, he'd have to be worried. He's clearly not worried for that. So if that's true, what could possibly be his understanding and his explanation as to why a knife that's used to just shecht an animal and placed down on the side, why would he assume that the animal is kosher? What else could it have come from? Where else can you be tola? You have to find another place that you can assume that the nick came from. Says the Gemara, Ela b'may ifkim ema be'etzem de mifarekas ifkim. You can assume that in general, if you check a knife before, and again, it comes out, it sounds like if you check a knife beforehand, you can assume that afterwards, if it has a nick, and this is a big chiddush, and this is why we don't paskin like him, you can assume that what? It didn't come from the hide, it came from the back neck, because you went all the way through, and therefore at the time of the shechita, the knife was kosher, and it only got ruined on the backbone, on the spine, let's say, of the neck afterwards, and that's why it has a nick in it. We don't paskin like this, because that's, why would you say that? Why would you assume that it came on the neck versus the front? But he holds that you can assume that it came from the neck. Yes, doctor.
Well, if we don't paskin like, and that sounds like the most logical thing.
Why?
We would, because otherwise, if we assume that it came from the hide, from the or, wouldn't that go to the thing you said that we can never trust shechita at all?
Well, that's why you need to check a knife every time you finish a shechita. We're dealing with a specific case where you didn't check the knife. The question is, can we be makil or not? So if Chisda is going to say you could still be makil, because we're going to assume that most of the time it's not going to get a pagam from that. That's why we specifically say, Rav Huna would say, I'm not ruining every shechita for you, I'm just telling you, be responsible and check the knife every time.
Right after.
And if you don't check it right after, the only time I'm going to be makil, if you don't check it right after, is if you then take it in the afternoon. If you're not going to check it right afterwards, then take it in the afternoon and break up some bones with it, because then I'll agree that you could be makil. Even though he won't agree, but then halacha will agree. But the point is that you have to check the knife, and it makes sense. You check a knife before, you check a knife afterwards. You're checking the animal, just check the knife.
Wouldn't it be more likely for the knife to get nicked on the bone than on the skin?
That's so that could be Rav Chisda's argument. I don't know. It could be his argument, but the hide's pretty thick. But that could be his argument, is that it's going to be more likely that it's going to get nicked if you now see a knife and you just shechted and you saw it right before you shechted and now it's nicked. So it's more likely that it got nicked on the back than in the front. That could be his argument. Again, we're not going to paskin like that, right. But that could be his argument. Says Gemara, "Have a uvda v'tara for Rav Yosef atzleisar chiyusa." There was an uvda where they did this and they shechted and they didn't check the knife till the afternoon, 12 hours later. And when they checked it, it had a nick, and they said all 13 animals are pasul. Says Gemara, who's it like? Kiman kirafuna vafilu b'kamais. It's like Rav Huna, and you have to assume that all of them are pasul, because he holds what? Even the first one is pasul. Because again, we assume what? We have to be choshesh, not assume. We have to be worried that maybe it became from the beginning of the first animal, from the hide of the first animal. Then even the first animal was bad. For sure, all the other animals are bad, right? Says the Gemara, no, it could even be like Rav Chisda. Lo Rav Chisda lebar mi kamaisa. It could be like Rav Chisda, and he could be poskening that you really should have postled only 12 out of the 13. Everybody agrees that the last 12 is puzzle. Because even Rav Chisda agrees you have to be worried if you see the nick now, that it came from where? That it came from the back neck of the first one. So for sure the second through 13 is bad. Yeah. The question is, Rav Chisda would hold that the first one is okay because he holds again that it doesn't come from the hide, it comes from the back, therefore the first one. He would agree that 2 through 13 is a problem because you have to be worried, not that you know, but you have to be worried that maybe it came from the back neck of the first one. Says the Gemara, or you could say Olam Karafuna. No, it's all like Rafuna. The Rav Chisda, Michte, Mitla Talinan, Mimai de Betzim de Mifarkeses, the Kamaisi Ifkam, deal with Betzim de Mifarkeses, the Basraisa Ifkam. Says the Gemara, 1 second. Rav Chisda is already the Kula man. Once he's a Kula man, so why are you assuming that he would say that it's a problem 2 through 13? What are you doing now? You're checking a knife, you're shechting 13 animals, and then you're checking it after number 13, or in the afternoon. Says the Gemara, well, when it says that all 13 are bad, it could be Rav Chisda, or it could be Rav Huna. It could be Rav Huna and say all 13 are bad, or it could be Rav Chisda and say 12 out of 13 are bad. Says the Gemara, no, it can't be Rav Chisda. Why are you assuming that Rav Chisda would say number 2 through 13 is bad? Maybe just like he was willing to say that when you have one animal, it came from the neck of the one animal. Maybe he would go so far as to say what? That when you have 13 animals, we can assume that it came from the neck of the 13th animal.
Right, yes.
Maybe he's going to be the cooler man all the way, not just a little bit. Says the Gemara, therefore the Gemara is assuming that, again, we don't pass like him. The Gemara is assuming that if you could already be told it, because again, it sounds like if you at least have an opening to be able to go away. We have this by Hilchos Nida sometimes, where a woman will show like a Mara, or she'll show something and it'll be a little bit red. So we'll assume that what? You could either say, well, it's bad, or we could say that no, if you have a Tliya, Tola means that you can like find something to hang it on. If you can hang it on something, you can find a little opening to say, well, did you do this? Or did you see this? Then we can assume. So over here, why do you have to assume that he's only going a little bit Lamekil? Maybe he's going all the way. And he's saying, once you can assume that it came from the neck of the first animal, maybe you can assume that it came from the neck of the 13th animal. And therefore all 13 would be okay. Therefore, the fact that they paskin that all 13 are bad must be like Rafuna. That's what the Gemara says. Rav Kahana matzrich b'dikusa ben kol chad v'chad. Rav Kahana would actually require them to check the knife between each animal, which makes a lot of sense. Come on, who's that like? Karafuna v'lifsol kamaisa. That would be like Rafuna, and it would be pasul the first one. That means that if you check after the first one and you see that it has a nick, you'd have to assume that it's a problem, right? Because you have to assume that it came from the or. Lo, even it could be like Rav Chisda ulach shure basraisa. The Gemara, I don't want to get into it. Rashi explains this, but the Gemara says that Rashi says the Gemara is changing its opinion. According to Rav Chisda, so you won't have to check between each one, because according to Rav Chisda, you can always assume that Lakula. It says, no, Rav Chisda ulach shure basraisa, so you're just going to be machshur the basraisa. Okay, you can see the Rashi there. Ihachi tibai nami b'dikas chacham. So now the Gemara says in general, you should need to check by a chacham. A chacham should have to check. If you're saying you have to check between each time, it's going to be a little bit annoying. Maybe not for the bodek, well, maybe for the shochet, but also for the rabbi. Every time you shecht an animal, he has to check it. Okay, I understand. You go to him in the morning and he checks it, but why doesn't the rabbi have to check it every single time? Says the Gemara, very interesting, that what? Eidecha neman b'isurin. The same reason that you could eat your wife's food, even though you're not there. We know there's halacha of eidecha neman b'isurin. We know that by isurin, not by marriage, and not by capital cases, but by isurin, by isur v'heter, like Hilchos Nida again, a woman doesn't have to show every single bedika to a rabbi. She can, but we assume that she can make the decision herself. We can assume that your wife, when she cooks in the kitchen, she can decide whether it's kosher or not. She doesn't have to ask a shayla every single time. So it says in Gemara, eidecha neman b'isurin, that the rabbi doesn't have to check the knife every single time. The guy can check it. So why do we ever show it to a rabbi, says the Gemara? Why do we show it to Rabbi? Why are you showing it to the rabbi before you start shechting? You're right, you don't have to. It's for the kavod of a chacham, to give him kavod. And as long as you know what you're doing with shchita, you don't have to actually show the sakin to the rabbi. You can go ahead and you can check it yourself.
So if we found the nick after you shechted the first animal, does that make the first animal?
According to Rav Chisda, it would be okay. According to Rav Huna, it would be a problem.
Even though you inspected beforehand.
Oh, if you inspected beforehand, according to Rav Chisda, if you find it right after the thing, so it sounds like maybe you could be tola it on the backbone at this point. But the Gemara is going to say we don't pass on that. Rav Huna would say it's definitely a problem.
Really?
Yeah.
We checked it before.
If you checked it beforehand, and if it has a nick now, you have to assume the worst.
But the worst would be after you did the shchita.
The worst is that
no,
the worst is that it got it from the orf, it got it from the hide in the beginning. That's the worst. Okay, a little bit more. Says Gemara, this whole discussion we were having Bein Rav Chisda, Bein Rav Huna until now, right? And before we were talking about, we brought in the whole idea of chazaka. You can assume that something is the way that it was. So if an animal wasn't yet shechted, unless you could prove that it was shechted, it's hamed al cheskasa. You let it stand on the chazaka that it had, that it wasn't good, that it wasn't shechted. So too, if you have a person who was tamei, unless you could prove that he was tahor, hamed al cheskasa. So where does this whole idea of keeping something with its own chazaka, keeping something in its status quo, where does this come from in halacha? Very interesting case. In general, oki milcha achazake. That you leave everything according to the chazaka that it has. Amar v'shmuel bar nachmeni amar Rav Yonasan amar kra. The pasuk says, "V'yatza kohen min habayis al pesach habayis v'hiskiras habayis shivas yamim." You have a kohen when he wants to go in and he needs to check out saras in a house. So he goes to the house, he walks in, he looks at the wall, he sees it's saras. He leaves the house, he goes to the front of the house, he closes the door, and he quarantines it for 7 days. Says what's going on here? Dilma denafik v'asa basar leishira. Maybe the Kohen walked over to the thing. He saw the nega. The nega has to be this color and this big. He walks over. He sees the nega. Now he walks to the front door and walks out, and he quarantines the house. 1 second, Kohen. How do you know that from the time you checked it till the time you walked out the door, the nega didn't get smaller? How can you quarantine a house unless you see it at the time that you quarantine it? Maybe you went ahead and you checked it, and now you walk out, and it got smaller in between. Says because at the time that he sees it, now there's a chazaka that the house has saras in it, and unless you change that chazaka, it's going to remain a chazaka. Says Gemara, you want to prove from the case of the Kohen and the saras, we said you want to prove that what in general we keep things the way that there's a chazaka. I said you can't make a proof from there. Maybe the reason that the Kohen does that is because he doesn't walk out. You're assuming that he checks the thing and then he walks out this way. He closes the door, he does his thing, it has a chazaka that he saw it. Maybe the only reason in the case of the Kohen that we can go ahead and quarantine is because after he sees it, he walks out lachora, he walks out backwards. And he's staring at the nega the entire time. And from the time that he gets to the door, he still sees it. So it's not a proof that we keep things as status quo. Because the only reason here that we're keeping it as status quo is because he actually sees it at the time that he's standing by the front door and he quarantines the house. But had he not seen it, Eina Chanami says Ravacha, had he not seen it and he walked away backwards, maybe one would say that he can quarantine it when he leaves the house. Maybe. But don't bring it as a proof, right? The whole point is that you want to bring this case as a proof that we keep things status quo. We can't bring it as a proof. Maybe the details in this case are such that the Kohen needs to walk backwards. Like people leave shul sometimes. He has to walk backwards, and only then can he quarantine it. But if he wasn't walking backwards, he's not allowed to quarantine it. Says the Gemara, Amalei Abaye, ridiculous. Shtei chuvos bedavar. 2 things I'll tell you. First of all, the pasuk says that the Kohen has to be v'yatza, or vayetza, he has to leave. When you walk backwards, that's not leaving. Walking forward is leaving. The Gemara is going to reject that in a second and say ridiculous. The Kohen Gadol leaves the Kodesh Kadashim on Yom Kippur. He walks the way that we're supposed to walk backwards, and it's considered to be leaving. And even if you tell me he walked backwards, he still needs to close the door. So maybe one can argue that what? From the time he closes the door till the time he quarantines, it got smaller. The fact that we don't say that, we're clearly holding the chazaka that it was fine. Says the Gemara. So the Gemara starts with the second one. That maybe what? If you're telling me that he left, no. He walked out the door, and he walked backwards, and then the door had a window in it. Therefore, he never lost sight of the nega. That's why he was able to quarantine it. But if he lost sight of the nega, he couldn't quarantine it because you don't have a chazaka. That can't be, because we know that what? If something you can't see without the window, then you can't give tzaras. You can only give tzaras to a bayis so you could see without the window. You can't open up a window, right? Lior says nigo. You can only say that it has tzaras if you could see it without opening up a window. Amalei Rabbi Zev First of all, Gemara says the fact that you're telling me that it's not a yitzia if he walks out backwards is ridiculous, because Utanan it says by the Kodesh Kadashim Yatso Balo Derech Kinisaso. First of all, he says to say that the Kohen Gadol has to do a yitzia, and therefore he has to walk out. What? Therefore he has to walk out back. Therefore he has to walk out straight. It's crazy, because he can walk out backwards, and that's still called the yitzia. And when you tell me that if it's a dark house, we don't open up windows in order to see whether it's a nega or not, there's no problem with having a window. The problem is that you can't say that I have to open up a window in order to see the nega. You have to see it however you see it. Whatever light there is, you have to use. But it doesn't mean you can't have a window. Right. So Lamaisa, he has a good point now. Again, it's very possible that you could prove from here chazaka, but his point is that, like we do many times in the Gemara, don't say that you can prove from here. In order to prove something from somewhere, it has to be 100% true, and there's no other option. Or else you can't make a move. We have that all the time where we ask a kasha. We don't necessarily reject the kasha and say you're wrong. We're just saying you can't bring a kasha on me because I can explain the case a different way. Anytime I can explain the case a different way, you can't bring a proof. It might be more likely the way that you're explaining it, but don't say it's a proof. So if you're going to tell me, well, we have a proof that we keep things status quo and that we maintain a chazaka because of the case of the Kohen where he walks in, well, how do you assume that he can quarantine? It must be that he sees it and he has a chazaka, he walks out regular, and Lamaisi quarantines it because there's a chazaka. He could have gotten smaller, we have a chazaka. Says, no. Maybe the case is such that he actually walked out staring at the thing the entire time. He was able to see it even through the window. And that's why he's able to quarantine. But maybe the truth is that if he walks out the regular way, he's not allowed to quarantine it. Because maybe one can argue that a chazaka is not a chazaka. Now, we know a chazaka is a chazaka. But just don't bring a proof from here, because maybe one can argue that the only reason it works there is because he sees it the entire time. Says the Gemara, Tanya Delok Ravacha Bar Yaakov. We have a clear proof, not like Ravacha Bar Yaakov, a clear proof that shows me that if the Kohen Gadol walks out the regular way and doesn't see it the entire time, he can still quarantine it, which clearly holds that he can rely on the chazaka. Where do we see this? Says Gemara, you could think he could do the quarantining from his own house. It needs to be by the front of the house. You think he could stand right by the doorway and give it? Says Gemara, no. He has to leave the house. Okay, so how does he leave the house? He goes ahead and he goes to the other side of the door and he does masker. Clear proof. The pasuk says even if he goes home and he quarantines it from his house, it's going to work also. It's not l'chachila. L'chachila he should quarantine it when he's standing outside. But even if he goes home and quarantines it from his house, it's going to be okay. How could he do so? He literally walked home. He doesn't see it anymore. Now again, the Gemara Rashi says a very interesting thing. He says, you still have to close the door and quarantine it from there. So how do you do this? Again, it sounds a little crazy, but basically what he does is he ties a rope to the door. He walks home, and then when he's in his house, he pulls the door shut from his house. Across the street, he's able to close the door while he's not necessarily standing there. But again, whatever the mitzias is, you clearly see that the Kohen Gadol is his skiras habayis. He's allowed to go ahead and he's allowed to quarantine it, even though he's not necessarily staring at the nega right now. The only way that he'd be able to quarantine without constantly staring at the nega right now is that you assume this idea of chazaka, that from the time that he looks at it, there's a chazaka that it's a nega, and even if it takes him 5 minutes to go ahead and quarantine, we don't have to assume that in those 5 minutes the nega got smaller. Because at the end of the day, a chazaka is a chazaka is a chazaka. V'Ravacha Bar Yaakov, what's Ravacha Bar Yaakov going to say? Who didn't want to use this as a proof? How's he going to explain the Torah which says that what? Which says that the Kohen can quarantine even from his house? How can he quarantine from his house? If he quarantines from his house, you have to say you rely on chazaka. Says Ravacha Bar Yaakov, not true. What could you do? You can make a human line. Maybe there's a guy standing right outside the house, looking through the window. He sees the nega. He passes on to the next guy. Nega's still there. Nega's still there. Nega's still there. In 5 seconds, the Kohen hears the nega is still there. He can quarantine it. Not because you based on a chazaka, because there's a guy who's actually watching. Yes, it's possible for the Kohen to be at his house and see the nega at the same time. But it's possible to have a human shield, human line, where there's a guy staring at the nega while the Kohen. Again, it's not likely. But the point is that you can't bring a proof from here. There is a way to set up the case to tell me that even if the Kohen is in his house, it'll still work without saying we're working on a chazaka. Do we say we're working on a chazaka in general? Yes, we say. But you can't, the point is that you can bring a proof from this specific case because there is a way to set up the case where he's actually able to quarantine it only because he either sees it or because someone else sees it. There's a line of people, there's a guy who actually says, look, I see the nega right now, and he can only quarantine it because he sees the nega right now.
That takes time, though, right? For the verbal